There were 2,900 of them. They were being led by a guy named John Buford. And he got to Gettysburg and he recognized why Gettysburg was important. There's high ground there. And high ground is a great place to defend. Early on the morning of July 1st, the first Confederates start moving towards Gettysburg. It's an artillery unit along with some infantry. They've got 10,000 guys. They're led by General Henry Heath. And these guys face off right here. If you've ever been to Gettysburg, you've been by it. It's called McPherson's Ridge. We are standing on a road where you stop to park. These are my pictures from my trip to Gettysburg. The Union line is out here on the ridge, McPherson's Ridge, out front. The Confederates are going to have to come up and take that high ground. So even with 2,900 troops, Buford is going to be able to hold off the advancing Confederate army for a while. What he's waiting for are reinforcements. The entire Union army is coming up behind Buford. The entire Confederate army is coming in behind Heath. And they're about to have a face-off in this little teeny tiny town. This is just a different view of McPherson's Ridge. You can see how it kind of drops off on the other side of that barn. That's what the Confederates are going to have to come up to. That's a statue of Buford on the battlefield there on the far right. That's Buford's statue. That's about as far right as the Union Army went across McPherson's Ridge. This is a different view from where the Confederates are going to start coming later in the day. They're going to come in from the north. I'm standing on Oak Hill, the extreme northern part of the battlefield. I'm looking south. Buford's men started on this part of McPherson's Ridge and they got pushed back to this road. Started here, pushed back to this road. That's where they made their biggest defense. All day long, reinforcements keep coming. They're not there immediately, but they're all on their way. This is a different view. This is a view really from where the main fighting is getting ready to take place. Where I was just standing in that picture to take the last one was Oak Hill. You can see that here. Oak Hill right here. And then this is another ridge called Oak Ridge. That's where the Union will be by the afternoon on the first day of fighting. They're going to stretch along this ridge and all the way out to this little bump called Barlow's Knoll. The Union thought that they were going to be able to defend it because it was high ground. It's like a pitcher's mound. It's not very big at all. It's just a little tiny hump out there. And defending it was terrible because the Confederates had cannons up here on Oak Hill and they could fire down on Barlow's Knoll. They were completely and totally annihilated out there on Barlow's Knoll. What happens late in the day for the Confederates, one of the worst charges of the day. I'm standing, let's go back, this road right here. I'm standing on that road, and right here is a stone wall. I'm standing here in that last picture. Here's a stone wall. I'm standing right on the hidden side of the stone wall. Oak Hill is back in this direction. And the Confederates are going to come marching across that field. If you go there and look at that field, or just look at the picture, what's it look like? It's just a field, right? What would you go do there? Play around, take a walk, have a picnic. It is so quiet and so peaceful, it's tricky. It fools you. You forget that where you are standing is a place where thousands and thousands of people lost their lives. And on this day, in this spot, it's Confederates. Confederates come busting out of Oak Hill and they are running across this valley. What they failed to see were the Union troops hiding behind this stone wall. They didn't even know they were there. And they just kept drifting closer and closer and closer. The Confederate commander is a guy named Iverson. He's got about 1,300 Confederate troops with him. And when they drift close enough, the Union troops stand up on the other side of that stone wall and they just shoot right across the men, and they fell exactly where they were marching. For the Confederate commander, Iverson, he was back on Oak Hill watching it through his binoculars. To him, it looked like as soon as the shots fired, his men laid down in formation just like you're supposed to do. You lay down to avoid the fire, and then you advance when you can. What he didn't know was that about 800 of those 1,300 men were dead instantly, just like that. They were dead or wounded, laying on that battlefield. His men were decimated, and they started waving white handkerchiefs to surrender. That's probably the best moment for the Union on day one. Day one was a bad, bad, bad day for the Union. If we go back to the day one map, all these dotted lines, these blue dotted lines, that's where the Union troops have to retreat. They were outnumbered by the end of day one, and they got driven back through the town of Gettysburg to one piece of high ground. That was the one place they could not lose, Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. And by the end of the day, that's where they were. By the next morning, the Union reinforcements will have arrived, and they will be sitting all along Cemetery Ridge in a big fishhook shape. But for now, the Union is driven back. Just on the other side of this hill, right back here behind this road, there was a dramatic moment where the Union was retreating through the town, and like we've talked about in some of the other battles, there's usually some sort of military unit, and their job is to fight and hold off the enemy so that your other guys can get away. They're like pawns in a game of chess. You're giving up a small unit of your men so that the bulk of your men can escape. They were led by a guy named Charles Tilden, Colonel Charles Tilden of the 16th Maine. The 16th Maine's job was to hold off the advancing Confederates so that the rest of those guys could go build a defensive work on top of Cemetery Hill. So he was told to hold this ground at all costs. And the fighting got heavy here. If you're fighting in battle, there's a couple of things that are symbolic for you. One is your officer's sword, and the other is your unit's flag. Those are the two things you don't want to lose. Those become trophies of war for the people that conquer you. So Tilden, knowing he was not going to surrender, took his sword and he jammed his sword as far down into the ground as he could, and he broke it off so that he would never surrender that sword to his enemy. He was going to deny them their trophy of war. The men took the flag, they broke the flagpole in half, and they ripped up pieces of the flag and separated it out amongst 146 different guys. In Andersonville, which we're watching today, you will see some of those men in there. Some of those men ended up in Andersonville with their pieces of the flag. Some of them made it to the end of the war, some of them did not. But when the war was over, they had a reunion, and they all brought their pieces of the flag back together so that they could sew together what was left of that flag. It was a big, big moment for them. They lost their position here on Oak Ridge, but they held off the Confederates long enough that the Union can build up their defenses. Now, I talked a little bit already about how this was brother versus brother sometimes, literally, brother versus brother. Those of you who are reading across 5 Aprils, it's literally going to be brother versus brother. One of the most dramatic moments of the first day that illustrates that brother versus brother concept took place here at the McLean Barn. If you notice back in this picture, you can see the McLean Barn there in the center. The Union, at one point, was clearing out Confederate sharpshooters from that barn. They had a number of prisoners of war, and as they were marching the prisoners of war, Union soldier Rudolph Schwartz recognized his own brother in a Confederate uniform. And he went to talk to his brother. They hadn't seen each other in months, maybe years. They didn't know if each other were alive or dead. So they have this dramatic family reunion at the McLean Barn. And as so many of these stories at Gettysburg end, it's not a happy ending. Rudolph Schwartz goes off and fights on Oak Ridge later that day, and later that afternoon, Rudolph Schwartz is killed at the Battle of Gettysburg. He gets that one last reunion with his brother, and they never see each other again. At the end of the day, the Confederate troops are on some high ground of their own, Seminary Ridge. They're on high ground of their own on Seminary Ridge, and we go from this on day one, at the beginning of day one, to the beginning of day two, the battle lines looking like this. They fought their way back through Gettysburg. The Union now controls Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, and Cemetery Ridge. They hold the best ground. It's at this point where James Longstreet, the guy who takes Stonewall Jackson's place as the second in command for Robert E. Lee, tells Robert E. Lee, we should leave. We should leave right now. They have the better ground. They have as many or more people than we do. We should just get out while we can. And Lee says, nope, we're here. They're here. We're going to knock this thing out right here. We're either going to win it or we're going to lose it in this spot. And I will draw your attention to some foreshadowing for day 2. Out here, way out here, you can see the Union forces, Dan Sickles. They're way out in front of everybody else because Dan Sickles is a fool. He is an absolute fool. We'll talk about him more tomorrow when we talk about day 2. Colton, you had your hand up. You have a question?
What was the question? Did they find all the pieces of the flag?
No. That flag never got put completely back together. Men would lose it. You can imagine years and years and, well, 2 years more of war. People carrying that around, it's going to get worn out. It's going to fall apart. So it never got put back together. Anybody else? Questions about day 1?